I was struggling with food, when I would see people just eat freely without over or under eating, they could just make choices around food peacefully. It wasn't a big deal to them. And it blew my mind because I was constantly thinking about food, constantly analyzing food, constantly feeling like I had this insatiable urge to eat too much, really intense cravings, you know. And I would look at these other people who just weren't normal with food and be like, how are you doing this? How are you making choices with food? Sometimes you eat the cake, sometimes you don't eat the cake, sometimes you finish what's on your plate, sometimes you don't. And to me, I needed to have a plan. I needed rules, whether that was a calorie limit or a certain plan that I was following or certain restrictions. I needed that plus willpower to be able to make decisions around food, if you know what I mean. So I didn't understand how other people were making choices with food. I never really believed that they just had more willpower. And I could see they also weren't following some kind of plan. So how they were making choices with food completely eluded me and fascinated to me. And I know I'm not the only one. So I thought it would be really helpful to take you through how I personally now make choices around food. Now I have a healthy relationship with food. How do I know what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat? Because I don't have rules, I don't have plans, I don't have diets. And it all happens very intuitively. Versus, and I want to compare that to how I was making choices with food when I was struggling with binge eating and yo-yo dieting, etc. And hopefully this can shed some light on this if you're also confused by it. And I just want to preface this by saying I'm going to be talking from my personal experience having a healthy relationship with food. I believe that for the vast majority of people with a healthy relationship with food, the decision-making framework, if you like, is going to be similar, but nevertheless, it's always individual. Okay, so I can't speak for everyone, but I'll share what it is for me and hopefully that'll be helpful enough. How do I know how to make choices with food when I was struggling? That was relatively simple. I was trying to make choices that aligned with my plan at the time, my calorie limit at the time, the diet I was on at the time, or my rules. So obviously it changed a lot depending on the diet that I was on, whether I was calorie counting, whether I was doing the whole foods diet, whether I was doing the raw food diet, keto, whatever the case is, or no sugar. There were always rules involved and always a very clear black and white framework typically for me to follow. And obviously when I wanted to eat outside of those rules, let's say I was on the no sugar diet and I had a really bad craving for chocolate or ice cream, that would send me into an absolute spin of like this internal battle, this internal conflict. I want to eat the chocolate, but I shouldn't. I want to, I shouldn't. I want to, I shouldn't. And ultimately, I would just end up checking out from that because I was deeply uncomfortable and stressful. And that's often what was driving part of the binge eating as well. But when I would go outside of my rules, so to speak, it never felt like a choice that I was personally making. It always felt like something that was outside of my control. So a lot of my choices with food were predetermined, pre-planned out. Not all the time, of course, but I did spend an awful lot of time planning out what I was going to eat and when. And that was all in an effort to keep me contained within my rules, so to speak, what I considered was okay to be eating. And now if we contrast that with now, I have a healthy relationship with food. By definition, therefore, I don't have rules. I don't have a diet plan. I don't have a calorie limit. I don't have restrictions. So it's a huge shift in my decision-making framework around food to go from someone that was very centered around rules in one capacity or another to now having no rules. And this new decision-making framework that I have around food it could take a really long time to describe all of the ins and outs. Basically, if you fully understand the decision-making framework of a healthy relationship with food, you basically then have one. So I just want to caveat this with that I'm going to be summarizing, okay? The first thing that I'm doing now is I really do have permission to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. So that forms part of my decision-making framework. I can eat whatever it is that I want. At the same time, I make decisions with food for the vast majority of time based on self-care and what is self-caring, not restriction or rules. And this is where that gray area massively comes in. For example, okay, let's say that I go to a birthday party and everyone is joining in on some cake. We just sang happy birthday, the cake is sliced up, everyone's having some. I'm not hungry, not physically hungry, but like, I want to join in, actually. I want to have a slice of cake. I want to join in on that experience of it. And that feels like an act of self-care in this specific moment. I'm not actually thinking about this very cognitively, okay? I was when I was learning to have a healthy relationship with food, but now it happens very intuitively. So yeah, in this moment, having a slice of cake, it's an act of self-care, right? And I've got permission to do it, so off I go. Now, later that night, if I'm feeling stressed or anxious or I want to procrastinate on something, and I can see that cake sitting over there on the counter, and maybe I'm tempted to go and have some to help me to procrastinate or to calm me down, hypothetically, probably reflect like, I can do that. I have full permission to do that. Would it be an act of self-care? No, actually, it wouldn't be an act of self-care. Okay, well then, maybe I'm going to choose not to do that in this moment. I can, it's not a restrictive thing. I can go and eat it genuinely, but it's not how I want to show up for myself and manage the situation for myself in this present moment, okay? Same cake in both of these scenarios, two completely different contexts. The intention behind eating the cake has changed. So that's sort of a good way of summarizing it to a large degree. I have full permission to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. I genuinely do. And at the same time, I'm more in tune with what's my intention though behind eating this or not eating this? And is that intention aligned with how I want to show up for myself? Is it aligned with self-care? Now, just want to say, when I was learning to have a healthy relationship with food, all of this was needed to be learnt, right? Through practice, through skills, through self-awareness, growing. It was still quite cognitive to some degree. Now it all happens very intuitively because my conditioned responses, my automatic brain wiring, if you like, has changed. But that's the first key thing, is there's a marrying of permission with an intention of self-care and a genuine desire to take care of myself. Not from a rule perspective, not because I have a narrative of should or shouldn't, but because I genuinely care for my well-being, emotional, physical, and mental. I hope that makes sense. I know when it's time to eat, largely because I'll feel hungry and then I'll want to satisfy that physical hunger. I don't like feeling overly hungry. It's not particularly comfortable. So my hunger level largely dictates when I eat. Back in the day when I was struggling, was out of control with food, really intense cravings, binge eating, the rest, it would have taken me a huge amount of willpower for me to largely eat when I felt hungry and not really eat when I wasn't physically hungry, if you see what I mean. Now that's very, very easy for me to do. And that's easy for me to do because I don't want to, for the most part, eat outside of physical hunger. It doesn't feel comfortable. I just wanted to draw attention to that because this eat when you're hungry thing could easily be turned into a new rule. And I want to express that this is not a rule that I'm following. It's just that I want to eat when I'm hungry and I don't have much desire to eat when I'm not hungry, and therefore it's easy for me to do now. And I have made a video on this specifically, why eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full is terrible advice, which I'll put up here and I'll also link down below. I highly recommend that you check that one out after this video if you're interested. I know the question will probably be raised of, yeah, but how did you reduce your interest in food to a healthy level, where you basically only really want to eat when you're hungry? And that's a really valid question. It's a really important question. I'm not going to dive into that how part in this video because this video will get really, really long otherwise. In this video, I really just want to focus on what it feels like to have a healthy relationship with food and how I'm making decisions around food. And if you want to go deeper on the how part, then I'll leave some other videos linked down below. And I also thoroughly recommend watching the hour-long lesson that I've created that goes deeper into the how part as well, which I'll also link down below if you haven't seen it already. Okay, so there I've got full permission to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. I have an intention of self-care, and that's driving the vast majority of the choices that I make around food, which is context dependent. And I'm in touch with my appetite cues, and it feels comfortable and it feels right to me to follow my appetite cues most of the time. Eat when I'm hungry, stop eating when I'm satiated. That feels good. That feels comfortable. It would feel uncomfortable for me to eat past satiety. In fact, it literally just happened. I was just having lunch with my boyfriend's grandparents and we had lunch. I thought it was just that main meal that we were eating. So I ate what I wanted to eat and I was pretty full, satisfied. And then the dessert came out, which I wasn't anticipating. And out of politeness, I had some mouthfuls of the dessert. And then I had to express, really, really delicious. And I'm simply full and I can't eat anymore, essentially. And I was saying to them that I find it really difficult to eat past satiety. Some people can. I used to be able to do that in the past, or I used to want to do that in the past. Now it does not feel nice. Another thing which massively factors into how I know what to eat is my preferences, what I like to eat, what I'm in the mood for. I don't always know what I'm in the mood to eat, but a lot of the time I do have some sense. Now, before, when I was struggling, I didn't really have an awful lot of sense over what I wanted to eat, because it's more of a fainter signal a lot of the time rather than a hardcore hankering. It's like, yeah, I kind of fancy some salmon tonight, or I fancy some pasta right now, or I fancy some cheese and crackers right now, or I fancy some fruit right now. Before, I couldn't really hear that because it is a fainter signal. It's clear to me now, but before I was so overloaded with signals of deprivation and anxiety and cravings and analysis that I just couldn't hear those fainter signals of what I'm in the mood for. I really hope that makes sense. And I will eat what I'm in the mood for if it's available, which often it is. If it's not a big deal. I know I can have something I'm in the mood for tomorrow, but often I'll just eat whatever it is I'm in the mood for. And I'll eat as much of it as I like to feel satiated and satisfied. And this might be a difficult thing for you potentially to wrap your mind around, because it would have been for me if you've been very in rule land for a long time of like, yeah, but there must be a rule book to this somewhere. There isn't. It really is that simple. And I think the simplicity of that is what makes it so complicated a lot of the time. It really is just, what am I in the mood for? And I'm gonna have that, and I'll eat as much as I want until I feel satisfied. And this has evolved and developed over time. The more that I've leaned into listening to my body, I need to make a video on that actually, but listening to my preferences, listening to what I'm in the mood for, it's evolved over time to help me to also see what makes me feel good and satiated and satisfied. When I first started leaning more into kind of eating what I wanted, as it were, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to eat. But I just practiced at it and just noticed gently what satisfied me. And what I learned quite quickly, fairly quickly, is that I'm a fatty person. I love meals that are higher in fat, typically, not all the time, but typically. I like a lot of fat in my meals rather than being carb heavy. I really like fresh vegetables and salad and color on my plate. I find that visually and emotionally and physically satisfying. And there's a lot of things like this that have been learnt through experience. And I didn't have to be overly cognitive about this because it's more of a feeling, kind of like, actually, and we are getting a little bit into the how, which I said I wasn't going to do, but I'll do it a little bit. And again, if you want to go deeper on this, then watch that hour-long lesson that I put together. Kind of like how when you listen to a song, you don't need to analyze whether you liked it or not most of the time, or how it made you feel, or if you want to listen to it again, or if you like that kind of genre of music. You don't need to do any of that. You just listen to music, and over time your natural preferences in music and what you gravitate towards, what songs you put on, just happens quite intuitively, right? And it's very, very similar, if not the same thing that I'm referring to here in regards to what I know I'm in the mood to eat. Okay, so there we have permission. I have full permission to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. Yes, I also have an intention of self-care with that. Whether my intention behind eating or not eating is, or what I'm eating is in line with how I want to show it with myself, feel self-caring or not. And that comes naturally now. I also want to follow, I'm also in tune with my hunger and satiety cues, and I want to follow them. It doesn't take me willpower to do that. It would feel wrong not to. So I follow those. That kind of guides how much I eat and when I eat. And my preferences, what I'm in the mood to eat, what I fancy. So that's 4 key things right there for you. There are more that I could touch on, and I'm happy to. If you'd like me to, just let me know in the comments. This is editing me just popping in because I missed something which I think is really important. When I was struggling in my relationship with food, I often was making choices around what I'm going to eat now or in the future based on what I'd eaten in the past. So either, okay, I'm allowed to eat this much, or I'm allowed to eat this thing, or I ate something that I shouldn't and now I've got to compensate for it. Now, with a healthy relationship with food, all of my choices are pretty independent of each other around food to a large degree. If I ate 2 slices of cake for some reason, for example, that wouldn't then impact my approach to food for the rest of the day. It would still just be, how much am I hungry for? And I can eat whatever I want, making choices with an intention of self-care. And what I'm in the mood to eat might naturally change, might do. For example, I may fancy something fresher because I had 2 slices of cake. I may do, okay? It's possible. But my decision-making framework and the way that I make choices around food will remain the same regardless of what I've eaten previously. I hope that makes sense. And I completely appreciate this probably raises a lot more questions than it answers at this stage, but that's okay. As you can see, it's a lot more abstract. It's in the gray area. It makes total sense when you're doing it, when you have it, like I have it now. I'm very confident in my food choices, but it can seem very abstract and therefore complicated to someone that's struggling in their relationship with food, like myself in the past, because there isn't a rule book. And when you're struggling with your relationship with food, often, you like the rules and you're very used to the rules, you're in rule land, and the concept of not having rules and making decisions around food can seem really, really alien and really, really weird, and may not make an awful lot of sense. So I hope this video has helped in some regard with making sense of that. Let me know what questions you have. Let me know what comments you have. I'll leave some other resources down in the description. You can also book in a discovery call with us to talk about your relationship with food if you feel like that would be helpful for you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.